Great. Hi, everyone. Um, so I'm going to start. If you want to go to the next slide, I can't. Oh, there we go. I was worried I wouldn't be able to see my slides. Okay. So yes. Hi, everyone. So we can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to start off this talk with kind of talking about why we as researchers should even engage with farmers and industry. And I think in some ways it sounds really nice, but there has to be a good intention behind it. And so I find that research questions are richer and more well-rounded when working with farmers and industry. Adoption is often higher because the treatments are formed by real-world challenges, and it's a great way to incorporate farmer realities into research. And in a lot of other projects that I work in, it's you're just trying to capture the innovation that farmers are already implementing on their land. Next slide. So as a researcher, why am I interested specifically in participatory methods? Well, from a personal standpoint, I work in agriculture, but I don't actually come from a farm. And so when I was training and during my educational experience, every time I was able to interact with a farm or a farmer or be on a farm, I really saw that as my training field. I really don't take it for granted that farmers invite us on their land and invite us into their lives, essentially. And so it's a really important component of my own training. And so engaging with farmers can also be an educational two-way street from myself as a researcher to the farmer and from the farmer to me. And so how can we communicate their knowledge and efforts through our data? And how can farmers learn about possibly the scientific process to be able to make their own production decisions? And we're going to talk about a little bit of co-benefits of this kind of research that aren't necessarily quantified in publications or in proposals. And it's also an amazing training opportunity for undergraduate, graduate, and youth. We need people from urban and rural and people from all around the world to work in Canadian agriculture. And so I, as an advisor myself, I think part of people's education who want to work in agriculture is to interact with farmers and really get the feel for the challenges that farmers have on their farms. And it makes them more marketable in the marketplace, to be honest. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about 3 different projects that I have been involved in or are currently working in, and all of them have a little bit of a different flavor in terms of how farmers are involved and the interactions and the relationships that have to be built. And so first I'm going to call it the PBB program because participatory plant breeding is pretty long and arduous. So that one was very much about direct farmer collaboration. I'm going to talk about the Nature Plus project in Zimbabwe. And finally, a little bit about the LEAP project that's Canada-based. Next slide. So every single project that I work in, it takes a village. There's many different people involved in this project. So I wanted to give a special shout out to Dr. Martin Entz, who kind of started this initiative back in 2011, and I'll highlight some of the breeders involved as well. Next slide. So the goal of the participatory plant breeding program was initially to meet the needs of the organic industry because many farmers are growing conventionally bred varieties. And we know that the selection environment of a breeding program is heavily indicative of how well it will do in the target environment. But we also wanted to explore the question of increasing diversity in our cropping systems through increasing the diversity in our breeding systems. So increasing diversity through parental material, through the actual selection environment, and also the selector. And so it representative alternative aimed to improve local adaptation breeding, to promote genetic diversity, and to empower farmers in rural communities through the breeding process. Next slide. So participatory, meaning that farmers are involved in the breeding process from beginning to end. As I mentioned, it started in 2011 and it expanded Canada-wide in 2013. I was coordinator for the project from 2016 to 2020. And the collaborating breeders that we had were Dr. Stephen Fox and Ann Kirk, Dr. Jennifer Mitchell-Fetch, and Dr. Benoit Bizimungu and Dr. Dwayne Falk. And we worked in wheat, oats, and potatoes. Next slide. So on the left here, I have the breeding pipeline of a formal breeding program, and the purple boxes represent, work that is done on research stations by breeders and scientists. And then on the right side, I have the Canadian PBB program, just to give you a snapshot of what was involved. And so the red or purple represents collaboration between research scientists, breeders, and farmers. Again, the purple is just research stations, so we increased some of the seed on research stations. But the green is about farmer-led and farmer-driven. And so we were involved during the green boxes, but it really was the responsibility of the farmers to carry out those sections of the breeding pipeline. Next slide. So just to give a visualization of boxes, the breeders were still making the crosses. The early generation, so the many little diverse babies were being grown on farm, planted by the farmer, and then the farmer made the decisions of what plants to keep and what plants to get rid of in order to come up with their own unique population that was adapted to their farm, that was selected by them. Next slide. So this just gives an example of the list of crosses that were made by the PBB program. We had an Eastern region section and a Western region section, but we would talk to the farmers about what was important to them, what disease they deal with, and we would send them 3 populations. So this is just an example of the things that we would share with the farmers. Next slide. And so from 2011 to 2020, we worked with 75 farmers from Vancouver Island to Prince Edward Island, all the way up to Fort Vermilion, Alberta. So it was a really exciting project. And I also just wanted to highlight the work that was involved from these farmers for this to be a success. Next slide. And so this was all done from 2011 to 2020, so it was pre-COVID, and so we didn't really use Zoom and other video calls, ways of communication, but we tried to communicate through newsletters, phone calls, emails, and I would actually try to visit every farmer during the 3 to 4 years that I was coordinator. And when you consider how large Canada is, that was a big challenge, but we really wanted to make sure that farmers felt engaged. And it was through this communication that we actually had these co-benefits, because farmers who were involved in organic agriculture and were really concerned about seed security, they were able to create a community of themselves and talk about not just breeding, but also about production practices and agronomy. And so I think that that's one thing to consider in participatory research, is that although there might be a specific project in mind, that if your lab or the people that you're connected with have other services to offer, then you should offer them, and that can be a co-benefit for them to want to continue to work with you. Next slide. We also relied on the coordinators of the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Food Security. So these purple stars are where they had hubs. And so we relied on them to get the word about the project, to bring farmers towards the project, to give me a call. And we also heavily relied on them in Quebec, because I do not speak French. Je suis désolée. So that was a really great help for this program. And oftentimes we have some NGO help in these participatory projects, because there's just not enough people. Next slide. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of indication of where the performance of these varieties. And so this was part of my PhD project. Next slide. So we really wanted to give the farmer populations a test drive. And so we tested them across 12 site years, across 3 years on organic farms and on organic research stations. And we tested them against Czech cultivars. And so Czech cultivars are essentially varieties that are commonly grown amongst farmers so that you have something to compare it to. Ideally, you would have some participatory plant breeding varieties that would do better than what farmers have right now. But yeah, you need something to compare it against. So that's what we mean by checks. Next slide. And so I know this looks really busy, but there's just a few nuggets of information I want you to pull from here. Essentially, the higher the y-axis number, the higher the dot is in the y-axis, the more responsive the varieties are to better environments, and farmers want that. You know, if you're going to go through the trouble of controlling weeds and adding manure, then you want your varieties to yield higher. And then the higher the x-axis is the average yield across all of the environments. Next slide. So essentially, we had some varieties that had low yield and didn't really care what was grown. It wasn't going to yield better, which is in the red circle. And then the majority of all of the populations that we tested were in the orange box. That's kind of average. And the majority of the checks actually sat in that orange box as well. But we had some really interesting varieties or populations that came out of testing these. Next slide. So we had some race horses, as I call them, so high yield, very responsive. They did poorly in poor environments, but they did really well in well-managed environments. And then I would call these golden horses, the yellow box. So these were high yield and more stable. So they actually did a little bit better in poor yielding environments than other varieties, but they were also able to yield well as compared to the other race horses. So that's really exciting to show. Next slide. So where are some of these wheat populations today? There's farmers, other farmers in Canada that are actually still growing them, especially the ones that are vertically integrated and have their own mill, or they have access to local mills and local markets to nearby urban populations. Next slide. So I just want to say, think about what we did well. I think that we kept farmers engaged, and I think because our lab is one of the knowledge hubs of organic agronomy, that was one way that we could kind of give a co-benefit to engaging with research. And we also were able to foster a community around the PPP project. But some of the challenges was, visiting the farmers, because we are such a big country, making connections between farmers and markets with unregistered populations so that the farmers could actually reap the benefits of their efforts. But that's another talk for another day. Next slide. And so I just want to talk about moving faster together. In a normal breeding program, you can get from cross to actual seed in farmers' hands. It's about 10 years. And in the PPP program, we were able to get these, I would call them organically elite varieties, in the hands of farmers after 6 years. Okay, next slide. And then I just wanted to highlight two quotes from farmers. One of my favorite things that I love about this program is that it's empowering farmers to do things to help themselves. And we're being encouraged to select for lines that work in our region. We're being encouraged to participate in such an important aspect. Seed is so important, and being able to participate in a program that allows us to strengthen the seed supply in organic agriculture is special. That's a big part of what is motivating me to be part of a program in the first place, is that the whole aspect of empowering farmers to be able to make their own choices and make their own seed is really important. I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to skip ahead. Next slide. So the Nature Plus project is in East Africa. It's in partnership with Canadian Food Grants Bank and Global Affairs Canada. Next slide. And we work in 4 different countries: Ethiopia, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. Next slide. And we work in 3 different interventions that were dictated by the communities. So conservation agriculture, farmer managed natural regeneration, and holistic rangeland management. Next slide. And our goal was to help partners that are involved in the project answer questions, track agronomic, soil, and biodiversity progress, and as they change their practices. Next slide. So I just wanted to highlight that in many times when you're working with organizations, you have to understand the organization itself. And so part of that project was trying to understand who to talk to about what, who's collecting data, and how we are connected to the farmers. Next slide. And so we decided to create a protocol. That was one thing that we could offer to this project. And we needed measurements that were low tech, easy to capture in the field, and repeatable. And we wanted to use the protocol document to also increase the capacity for independent research after the project is done. Next slide. So we decided to focus on soil health, biodiversity, and agronomic production. Next slide. And so the initial visits started in fall and winter of 23 to 24, and that was just for us to gain some context to try to start creating this protocol of what's important to communities and partners, and incorporate that into the data that we were going to collect. Next slide. So we ended up with this protocol and decided to focus on productivity, vegetative ground cover, soil health, and biodiversity. And through that, we were teaching people about replication, about randomness. Next slide. And we also provided guidance for the partners on analysis of the data as well. So we would report back analyzed data to the community. Next slide. And so this is just some examples of some partner farmer feedback during the protocol creation. Next slide. Sorry, I'm going fast now because I'm running out of time. Some communities actually wanted to add some measurements. And so this is just me highlighting that we need to be flexible as researchers and incorporate some of the community's interests into the actual protocol as well. Next slide. And so some of the take-home messages from this, and maybe I can answer more questions during the panel discussion, but really this project has really taught me to be flexible, try to find ways to use visuals as much as possible, and to plan multiple visits to keep that connection alive. And when working internationally, maybe have someone on staff that can effectively bridge cultural gaps, and try to be as transparent with each other as possible. Next slide. So in the LEAP project, which other people will talk about this, I just want to talk a little bit about how we incorporated industry. Next slide. So the idea is that when we want to try to produce food in relationship with ecosystems rather than in opposition to complex ecological function. And on the Canadian prairies, we have natural grasslands, and which were managed by Indigenous people and bisons. But we know that we can't necessarily put everything to grass in order to enhance ecological function. Next slide. So there's this idea, you can go to the next slide. There's this idea that we have many in-betweens, and we call it peri-perennial. And so these are production practices that are the in-betweens of annual perennial, so perennial-like, that we want to try to capture that farmers are already doing. Next slide. So the goal is for the LEAP project is to characterize the practices and the priorities of both settler farmers and Indigenous communities, to quantify the productivity, greenhouse gas emissions, and biodiversity of these simple annual, peri-perennial, and perennial cropping systems, and supply real data to HOLOS modeling to create future farm scenarios in partnership with farms. But how did we get here? Next slide. We have 5 different activities: the community engagement, First Nations case study, the landscape analysis, field studies, and the future farm scenarios. Next slide. So essentially what we did was we took all those different activities and we created like a menu of data that was geared towards the industry partners that were interested in working with us. And they all have different priorities. So we kind of catered and created a menu that was geared towards their mandates. Next slide. And so the idea is that the partners have their own pathways of getting towards economic and policy and adoption goals, and that we would partner with them through their own pathways to try to meet these goals as well. Next slide. And so next slide. In the landscape analysis, which people will talk a little bit more about, this is a way that we're incorporating farmers in the LEAP project, is by collecting data straight from their farms. Next slide. And so through this process, we've had many different meetings in the LEAP project, as you can see here. Next slide. And so this is my last slide, second last slide. So the next steps, we've collected data on the farm, and now we're starting to present some data. And it'll be, we want to know, is this data useful to you? How can we leverage this data for your mandates? How can we package this data for greatest impact? And how can we incorporate this into your existing partner pipeline for greater societal impact? Next slide. And so as a conclusion, weaving knowledge together is extra work, but it's great opportunity for co-benefits, results in data that is more meaningful, and a greater opportunity for student training and engagement. And as researchers, I just want to say we might need to incorporate a coordinator or a connector into our budgets when we're doing this work. And I want institutions to think like, are we doing a good job at training students to do this type of work? And also, for researchers, what are some extra services or benefits that we can provide to our collaborating partners in order to keep people engaged? Next slide. Okay, I'm all done. Thank you, everyone.